You are listening to the Football Diehards podcast with your hosts, Justin Lonero and Bob Harris, sponsored by DraftKings. Sign up now using promo code Diehards, DIEHARDS. Make a first-time $5 deposit, and you'll receive a free $3 ticket.
Welcome to the Football Diehards podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lonero, at Justin Lonero on Twitter, along with my co-host, Bob Harris, at Football Diehard on Twitter, and our producer, Kyle Dvorchak, at FF Kyle the Kid on Twitter. It is episode 1. This show is sponsored by DraftKings. Sign up using promo code Diehards. Our intro was made by the great Sigmund Bloom, silky smooth Sigmund Bloom of Football Guys. He was kind enough to do our intro. He is Bob Harris's nephew. Mr. Harris, the draft has come and gone. And it was fun. It was a lot of anticipation, hype going into it, and there's a lot of things that we talk about. How are you doing, Mr. Harris?
I'm doing fantastic. By the way, Bloom is only my fantasy football nephew. I am his great uncle, like most people's.
Right.
The draft went well. I thought there was, some great news for a number of players, some bad, the usual things. And there's been some subsequent developments. We had, all the Christian McCaffrey fans who are clenching their fists and bumping them in the air when they didn't draft a running back in Carolina. I took a little hit when they picked up C.J. Anderson this week. So, all these things will play out in time, but still some good winners in the draft. And it was I thought very exciting. Too many quarterbacks for my liking, but the running back prop looks good as well.
The future is going to be bright for the NFL. I can't remember a draft. Well, there was a lot of hype, and I think it was the ambiguity surrounding which quarterback was going to go off the board first, and there was a lot of changing right up until draft day, and then, of course, Baker Mayfield went one. Kyle, what's going on, bud? How you doing?
Doing well. I got to say, I've not been covering football and fantasy football for nearly as long as you guys have, but for me, pretty fun draft. Like you said, the ambiguity, like for the past few years, we've known who's going 101 with a pretty high degree of certainty, so getting to freak out about Baker Mayfield coming in at 1 was pretty nice, and I think that's a good place to kick off this podcast. So I guess Justin, you can go ahead. Baker Mayfield, what was your take on this pick? Was he the quarterback you'd have gone with? And fantasy implications, give it to me.
It's a good question. I think that they yearn for a quarterback, despite picking up Tyrod Taylor, who's definitely going to start week 1. I think unless something catastrophic happens prior to week 1, Baker Mayfield is 3rd on the depth chart now. But when you look at this class of quarterbacks, of course, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, and Lamar Jackson, and there's several more that were drafted, and we'll touch on the first round tonight. I think the future is going to be bright for the Cleveland Browns. I think we've been talking about that for 37 years. But when you look at Mayfield, I think what set him apart from the rest of these guys is the intangibles that we talk about. To me, he has some Russell Wilson in him. There's a lot of throws. He can make just about every throw. And there were issues with all these other quarterbacks. So I think the Cleveland Browns might have been a last-minute decision. But when you look at the Cleveland Browns on paper, now I don't think that Mayfield is going to have any fantasy relevance early on because he's not going to play. But when you look at the talent on the Cleveland Browns, they went out and they grabbed Carlos Hyde from the 49ers. You have Duke Johnson, who's a lock for 50 to 60 catches. That's his role. I think every NFL team wants a Duke Johnson at this point. And then they stole Nick Chubb, who's had knee issues, so I think there's some question marks surrounding Nick Chubb. But they spent buku money on Jarvis Landry, 90-catch guy. They grabbed Antonio Callaway with some character issues. He's a great young wide receiver. Corey Coleman was one of the better wide receivers in the draft a couple years ago. He had some injury issues. And Josh Gordon, if he's Josh Gordon that we saw a couple years ago, gentlemen, could be a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. So the pieces are there. And also David Njoku, who is a freak athlete, and I think that he'll be used as well. They'd be foolish not to use him. So there are no excuses for and a great offensive line to boot. So the pieces are there. They play in a difficult division, obviously the FC North. So they're probably still a 7-win team, 8-win team, but they're going to be good. And I think as NFL fans, fantasy aside, we have to be optimistic about the future, maybe the next few years, about the Cleveland Browns?
Past is not necessarily prologue, but according to the 24 quarterbacks who have started for the Cleveland Browns since 1999, the Browns aren't good at selecting quarterbacks. I'm not going to, I'm not going to, I think Baker Mayfield's a great prospect, but having trust issues with the Browns process, even with, an ever-changing series of personnel decision makers. I think John Dorsey's a solid football guy. There are solid football guys underneath him in the personnel office. But I think Justin's right in terms of, don't expect much this year. Tyrod Taylor, the bridge quarterback, the bridge that the Buffalo Bills were quick to jump off of, last year, with only Nathan Peterman to carry over. So, we'll see. I think Taylor has the supporting cast, and, Hugh Jackson's pushing hard. The good news for whoever it is, and for all those guys Justin mentioned, is Todd Haley comes in. It's his offense. He's a very pass-happy coordinator. And, so if Mayfield gets in, I think his accuracy, especially that short and intermediate accuracy, will serve him well and serve guys like Jarvis Landry well. So I'm fine with however it works out. I think the Browns are going to be a better team. I think getting excited about their overall prospects is maybe a bit of a reach. That backfield now chopped up, more ways than I like. A lot of talent in the receiving core. We'll see how the quarterbacks play out. I want to touch on something you guys mentioned, though, the intrigue at quarterback. It's interesting to me, kind of the dichotomy between NFL and fantasy. The quarterback in the NFL is a position of great scarcity, not so much in fantasy, right? We're all late round drafters. We don't, I'm fine waiting until the very late in the draft to grab my quarterback. So all this intrigue, is because there are not actually 32 guys capable of playing quarterback in a league with 32 teams at any given time. So that's why all the intrigue, and I do enjoy it. But from a fantasy perspective, a lot of it, just that excitement dissipates as soon as we put helmets on these guys.
And also, just going back to what you just said about quarterbacks, I tweeted something out the other day, and I think at this point in time, not that I was a guy that jumped on a quarterback early. I think there has been years where you want a Tom Brady, or especially after he came off 50 touchdowns in 2007. But you can look at 20 to 25 quarterbacks at this point, and they can
right.
serve you just fine. So
I was drafting a best ball last night, and I started drafting quarterbacks. I think it was in round 10. And ended up with 3 quarterbacks by the end of round 15 that are all going to be plenty solid, that I'm going to be very happy with, have no issues, running with this crew. So I think, Andy Dalton, I got Andy Dalton and Mitchell Trubisky in rounds 14 and 15.
That's fine.
Out loud.
25 touchdowns.
Right. And we know the upside of, there's some potential with a guy like Trubisky. And I think in best ball, where all of us are drafting right now, you're looking for a guy that can maybe have a few spike weeks and that you can get at a reasonable price. I got Phillip Rivers in round 10.
That's crazy.
You want some steady guys, but I think, the thing that I've seen in a plan that I followed last year was basically when I hit a point in the draft where I don't want to pay for anybody, I'll go ahead and get a quarterback. And last year that guy was Drew Brees, and you can see how circumstances can hurt you. They turned into a run first team. They're playing better defense. Brees didn't put up those those kind of numbers that he has over his time in New Orleans. But I'm still fine with that approach. If you get in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, you don't feel comfortable with somebody, and Tom Brady's sitting there staring you in the eye, I don't have a problem going with him there. I just, it's not a position of scarcity, though, in terms of fantasy, at least in 12-man leagues.
The next 2 quarterbacks off the board, we got Sam Darnold to the Jets, Josh Allen to arguably the most predictable team player composition, Josh Allen to the Bills. Both of them come in with sort of the opposite concerns of Baker Mayfield, whereas we saw, at least for fantasy, we have Baker Mayfield, Justin, just the really elite weapons if you look at the entire group around him. Sam Darnold and Josh Allen have near opposites, where Zay Jones and Kelvin Benjamin for Josh Allen, Sam Darnold's got a 3rd, 4th team Terrell Pryor, and maybe Robbie Anderson if he's on the field. Is there any way, I know you were just saying we take 5 quarterbacks in the NFL draft, everyone's excited, and now we're like, all right, everyone back to drafting Mitchell Trubisky, everyone back to Patrick Mahomes now.
Get out the 10-foot poles, right?
Yeah.
Get out the 10-foot poles because you don't want to touch those guys. Allen in particular, we've learned, as fantasy owners, offensive lines matter. That being the case, you look at Buffalo's offensive line, their center retired, Richie Incognito retired, they traded Cordy Glenn to the Cincinnati Bengals, who needed to upgrade. They didn't add a lot of help up front. They didn't add any help. And I talked to Mike Rodak from ESPN numerous times last year over the course of the season. And pretty much every time he said some variation of, and the worst receiving core in the NFL. Don't see much changing there. And Josh Allen, we know the weakness, perceived weakness is his accuracy, or, and I say perceived because, maybe there were issues with the level of competition and the guys he was playing with. Maybe they weren't where they were supposed to be, right? I don't know. I'm giving him way more benefit of the doubt than I should. But, I mean, he's going to get an opportunity. I think he may be one of the guys in earlier, and I don't think that's good news for anybody.
Justin, Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, are you any interested in redraft, or is this kind of wait until they get a good matchup for DFS?
Yeah, it's probably a better spot for DFS, and of course we're going to talk DraftKings prices during the year, and there's a lot of hoopla heading up to Week 1. But AJ McCarron, I feel like he's been groomed. It's not like he's learned behind Joe Montana, but I think there's probably a level of comfort for AJ McCarron. I think it's going to be tough for Josh Allen to get that job heading into Week 1 unless he shines really bright. But I don't know that Kelvin Benjamin and Zay Jones and a crowd like that, Rod Streeter, you look at Jeremy Curley, it's going to be LaShawn McCoy. Probably we'll be able to squeeze 350 touches out of Shady McCoy again this year.
The 30-year-old Shady McCoy.
The 30-year-old who's arguably, I mean, he's definitely a top 5 running back in the NFL as far as I'm concerned, or at the cusp, I'll say 6. But they're not going to be good at all. And from a fantasy standpoint, there was a lot of Charles Clay that I liked last year. I think the rationale behind Allen was at Wyoming. The conditions are similar to Buffalo, New York. So they rationalized that pick. All right, you're going to play 8 games in Buffalo. This kid can handle the terrible weather. But there's a lot of holes in Josh Allen's game. I mean, Carson Wentz didn't come from a big conference, and we saw what Wentz was capable of doing. So I think if you were to mold an NFL quarterback from a stature standpoint, where 6'5", 222, it looks like Josh Allen. But where there's been a lot of hype about all these quarterbacks and who's going to go where, I don't know that there's one that's spectacular. I think it's going to be between Josh Allen and Sam Darnold, who have the best shot at starting Week 1. But it's going to be a work in progress for all these guys, and I can't envision any of them having any fantasy relevance immediately. And the Buffalo Bills are going to be atrocious.
Yeah, it's going to be a rough go. And look, for Darnold, I mean, I think he does have a good chance. I prefer Arizona's pick, that's number 10. They traded up for Josh Rosen. I'm kind of planting my flag on him. I thought he, and I'm not a film watching guru and, not a draft Nick. I'm an opportunity Nick. Mm-hmm. And he is, he has as good of an opportunity as any of these guys, Sam Bradford being in front of him. Look, Sam Bradford's a very accurate passer, 72% passer. If he's on the field and doing well, they'll be fine. But if something happens to him, I don't know that they're not going to be in a hurry to get Josh Rosen in. And I know the knocks on Josh Rosen, he's kind of an ass. I don't have. So is Aaron Rodgers, by the way. So it's not like being an ass precludes you from being a great quarterback. I mean, this public perception of guys that we have is always interesting. But if the complaint against him is he's too smart, then playing for an offensive coordinator like Mike McCoy, whose offense the complaint is too complicated, seems like a great fit, right? So that's he interests me. I think he's a very good passer, maybe the best passer in this class. And for me, I would love to see him get a chance to get in a little work with Larry Fitzgerald before Fitzgerald's career ends. But that, look, all these guys, none of these guys for me are going to be redraft relevant. They're going to be waiver wire fodder if you get in a bind at some point. Maybe you take a stab at Baker Mayfield or one of these guys in a best ball, as a last round guy, and hope you catch lightning in a bottle. And, we'll have to touch on Lamar Jackson, too, because I think maybe there's going to be a package for him, it sounds like, in Baltimore. And Joe Flacco, not all that impressive as of late. So we'll see what goes on there.
Well, I was just going to touch on Rosen real quick. I mean, I read something the other day that he was in the airport and he was in a exec within the Browns organization asked I guess Josh Rosen dates one of the volleyball players at UCLA, and he said, "Why don't you ask his girlfriend? She's over there." And character issues with Josh Rosen.
And so how exactly does a volleyball coach telling a Alonzo Highsmith to go talk to his girlfriend a character issue?
Well,
I agree with Josh Rosen on this. Rosen said, how do you draw a red flag from zero information?
Right.
That was zero information. So,
Yep.
I mean, there's a perception of him out there. He's a rich kid, doesn't have to work hard, isn't in love with football, all these perceptions out there.
Yep.
I mean, we don't know this guy. So, I mean, clearly there's something to the fact, I mean, that he's a bit standoffish maybe a little spoiled, maybe, you got to keep him engaged, all these things. Clearly he can play football still. And I thought that was one of the most asinine stories of the draft this year. All due respect to Alonzo Highsmith of the Cleveland Browns. Good call by his part, right?
The court of public opinion can matter. And especially when these teams are investing buku money into these players. And like you said, there's something about Rosen where silver spoon, lack of work ethic. But our colleague at Football Diehards, John Laub, had Rosen as probably the top quarterback in this class. If Sam Bradford stays healthy and he plays the way the Rams anticipated him when they drafted him out of Oklahoma, and he's very efficient. We talked about his percentage in terms of throwing. He doesn't make a ton of mistakes. It might be a year where Josh Rosen sits. I think. However,
possible.
I think
Look, all these guys could sit. I mean, that's why we shouldn't be overly interested in him. Just one more argument, though. I mentioned Aaron Rodgers before. I mean, hey, he doesn't like his family. His family doesn't like him. He's kind of cold and aloof. Oh, what a horrible man. How could he possibly be a quarterback in the NFL?
Right.
What an asinine argument.
Oh, I know. But, hey, we live in a world where somebody says something and all of a sudden people can drop in the draft. And
it's the draft is a unique creature. That's a fact.
You know that. You were there. As far as Darnold, it looks like Todd Bowles said that Sam Darnold could play. I think Josh McCown, which is another great story, might play week one. I think Darnold might have the easiest path to start week one on an awful Jets team. But in terms of fantasy implications, week one, I don't see any of these players having relevance now, as of now.
Well, as we're sitting here going over all the permutations, I mean, it is basically we're guessing. And if we're guessing like that, I mean, we should probably guess that Jackson, as the most unique of these guys, maybe has the best chance to do something. And maybe he's the one we should be watching as all these other guys, go through the motions and try and work their way in the starting lineup. Something to look for from a fantasy perspective as you're considering these guys. Look at the team's bye weeks. Often that is the time when they try to make a switch if they're going to make a switch. So keep that in mind.
You weren't keen on Lamar Jackson playing. I mean, do you envision Jackson? I mean, I know he might be involved in some run packages. He's a dynamic athlete, and I think that potentially he could be the Ravens quarterback of the future. But
I think he's probably a year away. But the truth is, if any of these teams are losing horribly, or the guy, the starter that's in there, is not winning, then there's going to be pressure to make a change, and we'll see. Ideally, all these guys end up in the same situation as Patrick Mahomes, where he got a year to sit back, learn. Was just hearing today, one of the things that the Chiefs really liked was when they gave him the opportunity to start against Denver last year was his week of preparation. He showed him what he had learned over the course of the season. His play was solid enough too. I think those are the ideal situations, and anytime a rookie gets thrust into something is rarely good. But just on the off chance somebody's going to turn into Deshaun Watson, who of this group is most likely to be a Deshaun Watson? Who is going to be the exception to the rule if there is one?
It's going to be Rosen, or it's going to be Baker Mayfield.
Maybe it's Jackson, the guy who can run and throw like Deshaun Watson. I don't know. The NFL's copycat league. They're always looking to build on the success somebody else had last year. We'll see what Deshaun Watson does with defensive coordinators get paid too. They spend the whole offseason looking at film. Wouldn't be surprised if they figure some things out about him. But just based on what we saw of last year and the not just solid production, the super high-end production that they got with Deshaun Watson in Houston, with guys like Will Fuller being solid fantasy starters out of the clear blue for one reason, because Deshaun Watson was quarterback. I think that's one of the things that has to be intriguing about Lamar Jackson is just the nature of the NFL and how the teams tend to work and try to duplicate previous successes. We
have industry colleagues that there was some skepticism surrounding Deshaun Watson last year, or prior to what he did. And it's amazing because the fact that he gashed Alabama twice was overlooked. And, I think Deshaun Watson was one of these guys that's very cerebral, witty, and given the opportunity, he shined. And had he not gotten hurt,
and what this really tells us as fantasy owners is circumstances are going to dictate. Who's predicting, any point into the season that Deshaun Watson will become Deshaun Watson? The key to this from a fantasy perspective is identifying it as it happens and being the first guy to jump on it when you see it come up. When you see a guy, when you saw him going against Jacksonville, wow, you run out and you make a waiver claim and say, look, I know it was, he gets thrust into action, but damn, he, avoided the pass rush a little bit, showed some mobility, showed some playmaking ability. I think those are the things that with these rookies at quarterback that we're going to all be paying attention to.
With the bulk of fantasy right now being pretty much exclusively best ball, I think it can mostly be summed up for the rookie quarterbacks as probably just draft Mitchell Trubisky or Patrick Mahomes right now. Like Bob, you said, everyone gets so excited about 5 quarterbacks going, and then we all go back to fantasy and realize, actually, I didn't want any of them. I was excited about. I don't really want any of them.
Part of this though is where we are a school of fish, the fantasy world. I mean, you throw a lure in the water, and we can't get there fast enough. We're like the entire boom, boom, boom. Let's jump on that thing. And fortunately, some common sense comes in between the draft and the start of training camp, and we come to some reality. But I've seen some of these rookies go in best ball, some of the rookie quarterbacks go in best ball, and I always find it interesting.
Moving to a player everybody wants on their fantasy team, Saquon Barkley. I think we know he's going to be getting some of the most touches we'll see from a rookie this year, certainly, and in past years probably as well. Justin, I think the biggest question is, what's the touchdown upside considering how bad the Giants looked last year? But it was a strange year losing Odell Beckham, the Eli Manning controversy. Justin, the floor is yours.
As a fan, I was hoping that Barkley did not land in Cleveland. He could have gone 1, he could have gone at 4, and then the Giants went out and they went out and they got Saquon Barkley. And I think Barkley is a prospect that we haven't seen a running back. I have not. And we have seen some good running backs in the last few years get drafted early. Leonard Fournette, Todd Gurley, of course, but Barkley especially can run inside, he can run outside. I think the sky is the limit at this point. They've beefed up the offensive line. They drafted Will Hernandez round 2. They spent a ton of money on Nate Solder. Healthy Odell Beckham, Sterling Shepard's in the mix. You have Evan Ingram, who turned into wide receiver 1 after all the injuries last season. I can envision Saquon Barkley, 300 touches out of the gate, 50, 60 receptions, and double-digit touchdowns. I mean, he's that good. And if there's any sense of balance, and the offensive line is a lot better, we're going to see a running back in New York that we haven't seen since Tiki Barber. Of course, Jonathan Stewart might vulture some goal line rushes, which sucks from a fantasy perspective. But Barkley, I mean, I am a tad hesitant where he's going now. He's a first-round guy in these best balls. He's that good. So I can't – and as far as this class, by far and away the best running back that was in it. And it's going to be interesting as a fan to watch him on Sundays. From a fantasy perspective, a little bit hesitant drafting him. He's a rookie in the first round. But it would appear as of right now that he is going to be a 300-touch running back in an RB1. So whether top 12 – I'm going to put him at the back half, probably 11 or 12. I would have him ranked just based on the fact that he hasn't played in the NFL.
Current ADP on my fantasy NFL 10's best ball has him going off the board 10. I've seen him go off as high as 5. I'm guessing before the summer hits, that's where you're going to have to get him if you want him. And I'm fine waiting. Look, I have nothing against him. I think everything Justin said is correct. And I'll remind you what Pat Shurmur did in Minnesota last year with a very good rookie running back named Dalvin Cook before he was hurt.
Ooh.
So it's not like Shurmur doesn't understand how to use a talent like this. But I think the price is going to be very high. And for me, maybe I'm going to be more comfortable at some point drafting some of these other running backs, whether it's Darius Geis, Royce Freeman, Ronald Jones, Rashad Penny. Much later, and I'm saying much later, but, relatively speaking, much later than Barkley.
I am going to take Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley, David Johnson, Zeke Elliott, Alvin Kamara now that Mark Ingram is suspended, Kareem Hunt, LaShawn McCoy, Leonard Fournette, probably Melvin Gordon, and maybe even Christian McCaffrey over Barkley at this point. And more than likely, where guys like Julio Jones and Odell Beckham coming off injuries, I started Odell Beckham, Julio Jones today, round 1-2 in an MFL 10. Okay, so my foundation is set at wide receiver, and I'm gravitating towards the Joe Mixons of the world that can be had, and the Jerick McKinnons. But if I had to rank Barkley tonight, he would probably be in the 12 or 13 range, butting Devontae Freeman, just based on talent, based on the fact that he hasn't rushed in the NFL yet. I am not going to draft him. I will not draft him a ton in the first round because of the unknown.
And you won't have him much. And that's okay. I just think, there's going to be a lot of people that push him up ahead of a handful of those guys that already are. I'll just, to build on that value point, I did a best ball on draft.com last night. Got Royce Freeman in round 5, got Ronald Jones round 7, got Kerryon Johnson round 11. Mm-hmm. That's pretty good value for guys that are likely going to be the primary back for their teams.
Absolutely. And now, where would you rank them, Bob? Real quick, where would you those three between Freeman, Ronald Jones, and Johnson? Where would you have? How would you rank those three tonight?
Just for the rookies, I go Barkley, Geis, Freeman, Penny, Jones, Michelle, and Sony Michel for New England. That's kind of how I'd be drafting them. I'm kind of perfectly fine right now letting other people draft Rashad Penny. Again, I'll stress this often on this podcast, offensive lines matter. This is not a knock on Penny. I think he's a good for the scheme. Seattle maybe reached for him. It was a surprising pick. We were all shocked in Dallas when the pick happened. Didn't see it coming. But now that he's there, clearly if I'm an opportunity, Nick, he has a great opportunity. They're switching to a gap scheme with Brian Schottenheimer and his offensive coordinator. That's good news for him. But to run the gap or the zone or the power blocking scheme, you have to have somebody who can block. And Seattle hasn't had a lot of that for a while and didn't see a lot of moves to shore up the offensive line yet. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But I like Freeman an awful lot of the lower range guys because I think he walks into Denver big, fast. Had a heavy workload in college, so I guess that's a bit of a concern, at Oregon. So, but not for me. I'm buying in, especially this year. I just think we saw what Devontae Booker can't do, and what he can't do is be the lead back of an NFL offense, and maybe a fine complementary player. But I think once Freeman gets in there, he brings them everything that AJ or that CJ Anderson did. Yeah. But he's more dynamic. So I like him an awful lot, especially since he'll be going a little later. And I'm a cheapskate. You guys know that.
Right. Opportunity, mm-hmm. And the volume
and price. These are the things I'm looking at in best ball. I want, I'm not afraid to pay for opportunity, but if I can get it cheaper, please let me.
In terms of opportunity, Justin, I think your Patriots took a guy who will see the least opportunity in terms of raw touches of all the round 1 backs, of maybe all the round 2 backs. But what is that Patriots offense opportunity worth, Justin? Because I think Bob only had him at about the 6th running back, maybe off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Justin,
yeah.
Are you higher than that?
It sounds right because we've been using the word ambiguity for a while, and I think that defines the Patriots' backfield year to year. But the good news is, out goes Dion Lewis, who I was very keen on, and Dion Lewis has a special place in my heart. And in comes Sony. It's a guy that is probably going to have a large role right off the bat. I don't know that bell cow, although LeGarrette Blount had a season where he was a bell cow in New England. I don't know that bell cow and the New England Patriots are words that have kind of aligned recently. You have Rex Burkhead, who's going to be involved. You have James White, who showed us he can catch 70 balls, and Gillislee might be on the roster bubble. So it'll be tough. But I think that if Bill Belichick goes and gets his guy, and if you've seen Sony Michel run at Georgia, of course he played with Chubb. He's a special talent. But as far as 20 carries a game, I can't envision it because I just listed 3 or 4 other running backs who are going to be in the mix. Brandon Bolden is still on the roster, which is interesting. It's a game of eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and your guess is as good as mine. And it depends on the week-to-week matchup. So I can't envision. I feel as though he's safe, but I don't know that he's going to knock our socks off
Right. I think he's like, if you look at Lewis last year, it was 35% of the snaps. I could live with that if that's what Michel's getting. And I'm just going to, go in on this again and talk about what this means for Tom Brady. This draft in general, I thought he was a big winner. They went offensive line early. Isaiah Wynn they drafted. Yep. They traded for Trent Brown from San Francisco, and then they draft Michel. And Josh Norris from Roto-World tweeted something out this week that, hit me as, teams lie except when it comes to their wallets and draft capital. That's when they're telling the truth. You just watch what the investment. There's a pretty substantial investment in Michel. So I'm not knocking him. I just think I like the high end of this class. I think Nick Chubb could be as good as any of these guys, but he goes into a situation where Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson is right off the bat, and then all those receiving targets. So it's the same in New England. And one of the things that could, Michel could rise dramatically to me, because the only thing that matters in New England, in terms of the receiving, the receiving game, the passing attack, is, does Tom Brady trust you? Are you where Tom Brady expects you to be when he expects you to be there? Not everyone is, but guys that get on that page with him are going to make hay. And if Michel gets that kind of 35, maybe 40% snap share, I was playing Deion Lewis a hell of a lot last year, and I would play Sony Michel a hell of a lot this year if that's the case as well. So not dissing him, just I like the opportunities a little better for the other guys.
Ball security is important in New England. I will say that. If you can't chip, if you can't block, you put the ball on the ground, you're going to find your butt on the bench real quick. So we'll see how Sony handles the football early on.
Bob, you were stressing opportunity, because I think we all know that it doesn't really matter how talented you are if you're not getting the ball. It's, for fantasy purposes, get out of here. So with that being said, in the first round, we got two receivers who really getting opportunity is going to be tougher than the first year. Is there any interest for you, DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, or is it just stay away because of opportunity?
If you made me, it'd be Moore. And I think Ridley is a great player. He's a good fit for what Matt Ryan is good at, timing routes. Matt Ryan not great at throwing deep balls. I mean, he's a timing passer, and but Ridley is a guy that does that. But that doesn't mean Julio Jones' skills are not a good match for anybody. He's a good receiver, so he comes in as the number 3 guy. I don't know about Moore. I sitting at the serious table, as we covered the draft live, a lot of those guys didn't like the landing spot, and I think I liked it a little more. Well, we forget that Cam Newton, he's a pretty good quarterback. I know the sky balls and all this talk, but I think the thing that gets me about Moore is he's kind of a running back once the ball's in his hands. And so maybe he can make some plays and get some chances to make plays that Ridley won't. I know there's going to be a lot of mouth speed, but Norv Turner, known for using the tight end and the running backs extensively in the passing attack. Maybe that's also another knock against him. But I'm not going to sit here and say that, Cam Newton's going to be the problem for him. And I think he may end up getting, of these guys, look, I'm not excited about, either of them this year. But if you made me take one, I think it would be Moore, just based on where he's at, who's ahead of Ridley in terms of both Jones and Mohamed Sanu. Maybe Ridley can, overtake Sanu at some point this season. Or maybe he can catch the touchdowns that Sanu throws. I don't know. But whatever the case, the good news for Ridley is he knows the offense. Steve Sarkisian is the offensive coordinator and was at Alabama when Ridley's there. So he does come in with an understanding of the offense. So maybe that's a little plus in his direction. But I'm not looking to draft either of these guys before I get too far into this. Neither of them are going to be on many of my rosters in redraft, or any, I should say.
Fair enough. I mean, a lot of people had DJ Moore as the top wide receiver in this class. I don't know that it's a great spot for him with Cam Newton. And look, Cam Newton is a pro's pro, right? And what separates Cam Newton is the fact that he can rush for more yards than a lot of starting running backs in the NFL. So there's the differentiator there. The last couple of days, they grabbed C.J. Anderson, who's going to, as a volume guy, as we saw in Denver. And Christian McCaffrey is going to have 70 to 75 receptions, permitting he stays healthy. My question is there enough scraps to go around for a guy like DJ Moore, where Greg Olsen has been that proverbial safety blanket for, it seems like 20 years, with Cam Newton as a clear rapport there. You have Devin Funchess, who's coming into his own, who's a glamorized Kelvin Benjamin, if you will. And now Kyle, they drafted Curtis Samuel, who's one of these freakish players that could do a little bit of everything, but he's coming off an injury with his ankle. Ron Rivera is saying, it's not going that quick. So it makes you wonder why they grabbed Moore. Is Curtis Samuel going to be in great shape? Because I think Curtis Samuel, similar to DJ Moore in the sense where do a little bit of everything, not tall guys that we've seen in Carolina, but there's a lot to go around. And my question is DJ Moore a 60, 70 reception guy? I don't think so. I think 40 fits the bill. 40 to 50, maybe.
Yes.
Maybe.
Correct. And I think that's the thing. If you're a sharp fantasy owner, maybe you watch, some of the other guys in your leagues, draft those guys a little earlier, and then you look at the guys with maybe lesser names with better opportunities. You look for Michael Gallup in Dallas, where there's no more Des Bryant, Jason Witten. Hell of a lot of targets there. You look at a Christian Kirk in Arizona, where maybe he jumps right into the starting lineup for the Cardinals, and maybe he's a impressive enough player. And Anthony Miller is in Chicago.
Yep.
Looks like a great player, but they brought in a lot of guys there too. So I'm looking, again, opportunity matters in this case, and maybe those are the guys that I'm taking last round flyers on, as opposed to burning some capital on maybe more productive guys when people are taking DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, I think the upside for Moore is that Justin, like you said, Devin Funchess is probably best case scenario, an improved version of Kelvin Benjamin. That's not that great a receiver. DJ Moore, if you believe in his talent, which I personally do, I think he was the best receiver. If you believe in his talent, year one being the leading receiver in terms of just out of the receiving core isn't entirely out of the question. Is it a long shot? Sure. But Calvin Ridley being the receiver on his team, obviously not going to happen. So I think in terms of, if you want to construct the argument that way, upside in terms of targets, it's probably DJ Moore, but like you guys said, I think maybe let people see the first round draft capital and overdraft these guys and look for your Anthony Millers, maybe your Dante Pettis's, whatever you have.
And when you look at, if I look at Ridley, you see a guy that has polish, and I like polish. When I think of Calvin Ridley, I think you have to draw comparisons to Amari Cooper, who came out of Alabama. Polished, ready to go, but Mohamed Sanu's in the equation, who would appear as a rapport with Matt Ryan, 65, 70 catches for Sanu. I think it's kind of the same case for Calvin Ridley, permitting something happens to Julio Jones or Mohamed Sanu. So 50, I'll give Ridley 50 catches.
So I'm kind of, I think that's kind of generous, but I won't argue it. But I think what I would point out is if you're looking to get the Ridleys and Moores of the world, looking at the ADP right now, 129 for Ridley. I'm sure Moore is right in the same area. And so that makes me wonder where I'm getting the Corey Davises. And, I just see some of the second-year guys that maybe are coming off bad seasons. The Mike Williams, I'm sure you can get pretty late as well. Corey Davis is going ahead of those guys. But, the Mike Williams may be off the radar. I'm not recommending going out and drafting John Ross, but I like his chances in year two better than some of these other guys in year one. Because it's a gamble either way, right?
It's a gamble. John Ross is a burner, but look at his quarterback. Look at Andy Dalton, and I don't know that Dalton is going to be able to use John Ross in terms of finding him up the sideline for 50 yards. I mean, Andy Dalton is not Tom Brady. I guess that's the story. You mentioned John Ross quite a bit. I don't know if it's because of his 40 speed or.
There's two things you can't coach in the NFL: size and speed. He has more of half of that than pretty much everyone else on the field any given Sunday. So. That always interests me, especially when it doesn't cost me anything. And I think in Ross's case, everyone's going to look at last year. It was a total flop. Look, I'm not advocating going out and making him part of your fantasy receiving rotation, but nor am I recommending that you do that with Ridley or Moore either. I mean, these are guys that you're taking a flyer on at the bottom of your depth chart. I don't see any difference to me taking, a huge leap. If we're expecting both of those rookies this year, the first rounders, to be under 50 catch guys, and I think maybe we're even being a little generous with those numbers, then maybe I want a guy with a little more upside, or I want to take a chance on somebody else. But that's kind of, I'm old and I'm conservative in that way, which is actually taking risk. I would just rather take a flyer on guys late in the draft, at the end of the draft, rather than pay up for these guys that I'm pretty sure won't have good seasons.
And there are guys like Miller that you mentioned, Christian Kirk in Arizona, and Gallup without Des Bryant. I mean, these are players. And I just mentioned opportunity that they're not competing with Julio Jones.
Right, a lot of targets open in Dallas all of a sudden with no Des Bryant, no Jason Witten, and not a lot of tight end as well. And you look at the rest of the talent at the wide receiver, and the same with Christian Kirk. I think in Arizona you could make the same argument. But these are all I think we need to stress that we're sitting here and we're talking about rookies and we're interested in rookies, but not so much this year in redrafts. I mean, these are guys that if they come on, I'm going to be looking for them on the waiver wire. They're not someone I'm going to be eager to draft.
Yeah, speaking of guys who won't cost you nearly anything, I know this is a fantasy football show, but Bob, I have to ask you, at a position like tight end, where typically it takes 2 to 3 years to break out, how did our last skill position player of the draft that we're going to talk about, Hayden Hurst, who is 25 years old, get drafted in the first round?
I won't let Hayden Hurst me. Not this year. I think he has, he's a solid player, but and he's in a situation where the team is clearly rebuilding its receiving core. So maybe opportunities will come up. And you look at Mike Gesicki as well in Miami, where Adam Gase has been trying to recreate the magic he had with Peyton Manning and Julius Thomas for since when? And even to the degree where he brought Julius Thomas himself into Miami last year. So, I mean, look, he knows how to do this as a coach. He knows the plays to call. Can someone execute that? And can Gesicki do it? A kind of an athletic freak, and maybe he can. But none of these guys will be on my redraft radar. And I don't know that I've looked at any of them in best ball yet. I can't imagine that I will be anytime soon. The same with Dallas Goedert, who goes to Philadelphia. I mean, we know they'll be able to create some mismatches with him and Zach Ertz both on the field at the same time. But I'd rather draft Trey Burton going to Chicago to play the Travis Kelce role in Matt Nagy's offense. Guys like that. So, and again, that's not to say these guys can't come out of nowhere and fare well. They can, but they're going to be guys that I grab off the waiver wire when they do, if they're available. And if I miss out on them, I'm going to look for the next guy who comes along on the waiver wire.
I think you're right. And Hayden Hurst is he's probably going to be the starting tight end in Baltimore. I feel like they haven't had like a bona fide tight end in Baltimore since Todd Heap. Although Ben Watson,
Dennis Pitta put up great numbers that he had.
Always hurt,
but always got a ton of targets and had a ton of catches. So look, yep. I mean they know how to use the tight end there. But I think part of the thing with Pitta was his, he had a good connection with Joe Flacco. And you got to do that. But I mean, if you look at the position, I mean, Nick Boyle, great blocker. He's going to see some times. I think the Max Williams train has left, and they have another rookie, Mark Andrews. Yeah, may well have. They've got another rookie in Mark Andrews. They draft a little later, so they have a lot of bodies there. And we'll see how it plays out. But again, I'm not going to burn draft capital on those guys. Look, I can stream tight ends if I, I don't have a big problem doing that either. So thinking I'm going to, expend draft capital on a rookie tight end when I'm already bitching about having to pay for a rookie wide receiver. I think that tells you where I'm at.
Yeah, and historically they struggle. I mean, I can remember talking to Mike Clay last offseason. O.J. Howard in Tampa Bay, and I think Howard, we saw what he did at Alabama. He's a special talent. But then the Bucs spent a lot of money on the Cameron Brates of the world, who have a rapport with Jameis Winston. It's a position where I think it's a great place to swerve in DFS, and I think I've referred to the tight end position as a sea of mediocrity. After Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz.
And I mean, you mentioned a guy like Braid. Over the last 2 seasons, 2 guys at tight end have more touchdown passes than Braid, and it's Jimmy Graham and Kyle Rudolph. I mean,
right.
And you mentioned a guy earlier in Charles Clay. Look, I'm not a fan of guys with chronic knee conditions, and he's had that since his days of Miami, but he somehow gets on the field on game day and still capable of making play. There's a hell of a lot of guys, a lot of bodies at that position that I'm interested in. Vance McDonald going into his second season in Pittsburgh, if he can stay healthy. I mean, it's just, there's no shortage there for me. And avoiding this is one of the things where I break out Justin's 10-foot pole, and I wouldn't even touch them with his.
That's right. And it's a deep enough position. You have players like Jake Butt who we want to see. We have players like Gerald Everett. No, Gerald Everett, or even there were Ricky Seals-Jones weeks last year in DFS that made people money.
He's on my best ball radar. That's for sure.
Exactly. There's a shortage of pass catchers in Arizona outside of Larry Fitzgerald. we're talking about maybe Christian Kirk, but David Johnson is number 2 in the passing game.
Yep.
Vance McDonald has relocated. We want to see more of George Kittle in San Francisco and Austin Seferian-Jenkins in Jacksonville. And I mentioned David Njoku earlier in the show. I think is a special. They're more or less outside of the Gronks and the Kelseys and the Zach Ertz and Olsons and Delaney Walker.
Look, if you're looking for values, I mean, who's going to want to be drafting Tyler Eifert this year? Guy can't stay on the field. But if he does, I mean, he missed 3 games, in 2016, still had 13 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the guys I'd rather draft. And if something happens to him, I'm drafting Jordan Reed in round 9. And I'm taking that all day. And I'm knowing he's not going to play the whole season. And I'm taking Vernon Davis as my, 20th rounder in NFL 10s after I take Reed. But, so, I mean, I'm fine working around the situation at tight end. And I'm sorry, Hayden. I'm not going to own you.
It's a first round show, and there's going to be many more episodes of this podcast leading into week 1, which, of course, we'll talk DFS. And I think that, hey, maybe there are weeks where you get Hayden Hurst at the bare minimum, and he gets 2 touchdowns within the red zone, and he separates you from the rest of the pack in a GPP or something. But it's certainly a position where in season-long leagues, you're not drafting Travis Kelce at a premium or Rob Gronkowski or now Zach Ertz. You're content with the Charles Clays of the world. You're content with 50 to 60 receptions, 700 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Although Jack Doyle caught 80 passes last year, but now Eric Ebron is in Indianapolis, so it'll be a kind of a share there, and we don't know what's going on exactly.
Look, and I mean, think about Akins in Houston. I mean, Houston has a huge hole at tight end, and maybe it's the tight end we're not looking at as a rookie that's going to show up and do something. So, maybe that was a situation. But even at that, how excited am I? Not all that much.
I think to sum this up, I asked you about Hayden Hurst, and then we spent the rest of the not 30 seconds that you spent on Hurst talking about every other tight end in the league. Just don't worry about it. There are enough bad tight ends in the league. And I think that will bring us to a close for episode 1. I've been your producer, Kyle Dvorchak. Follow me on Twitter at FFKyleTheKid. You can follow Justin Lonero at Justin_Lonero. Find Bob Harris at Football Diehard. Make sure to use our promo code Diehards on DraftKings to get a $3 voucher. And make sure you like, subscribe, do whatever your podcast app allows you to do. We'll talk to you next week.